The more things change, the more they stay the same. At least that's the hope for the Bucks. We'll explain coming up next on today's Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia from the Bucks Radio Network. She is Camille Davis, the host of the Technical Foul podcast. And you can find her on the Locked On NBA show as league analyst as well. We thank you for making this your first listen of the day each and every day. All the everydayers out there that have been with us through another long off season that certainly continues to get more and more interesting. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. So we had a couple of, I guess, reports would be the way to phrase it, Camille, over the weekend. And we'll start on the Giannis front since I think that's the bigger name. There's just been more and more, I suppose, reporting. We can call it reporting, conjecture, speculation, all of it mixed into one big grab bag, but more and more messaging that Giannis is not going to ask for a trade. I think we both, when the offseason started, I know we both said I expect him to be here. I think we were both around like 65% that I think he stays here. And there was something that came out over the weekend from an account none of us are familiar with. But the Jake Fisher thing that happened in his mailbag late last week, too, saying, going into the draft combine or the draft lottery as well, there was a lot of optimism that, hey, this guy's going to be available and this is our chance to load up and go get him. And now that's slowly started to fade. And we get to this point where all of the anxiety over, man, is this really it, is slowly starting to exit the room now for Bucks fans.
Yeah, it's slowly heading in that direction. Like I saw the aggregated tweet from the Jake Fisher segment, and it just said rival teams lose confidence in Giannis trade possibilities. And my response was just the Grinch smile, where it gets bigger than the ears curl at the top too, of like, this is what I like to hear. And Jake Fisher was just mentioning, like, just saying that as of late, all the confidence that teams were having around Giannis is now being placed with a lot of skepticism. And now it's we'll believe it if we see it type of situation, where before, as you mentioned, it was, man, we might have a shot to really get Giannis here. So it seems as if things are settling in where it will be another year with Giannis in Milwaukee. But of course, I won't speak in any absolutes until we absolutely know for sure hear from Giannis. But everything's trending in that direction. So to the point where if I had to put a percentage on it, like I'm like 85-15 that Giannis is still in Milwaukee this upcoming season, which, as we've talked about throughout this offseason here on Locked On Bucks, if Giannis does remain, and with the way that the East is looking right now, how long are you really out of the contender window with what's going on in the Eastern Conference if Giannis is here? How quickly can you build this back up? And now we can kind of start getting more into the conversations of like, well, what does this team look like with Giannis at its center going forward?
And I didn't intend to like disparage what we were talking about before. And there was another reporter account I'm not familiar with, but the Ari report on Twitter was who had the breaking news that Giannis is, I forget the wording, but basically Giannis has made it clear he intends to remain with the franchise. That is not a Bucks specific account. That is a quote unquote NBA insider who's, looking through some previous tweets, has had some pretty relevant and accurate reporting in the past. So take that as you will. But yes, that's, and you and I both said from day one, the approach this offseason for the Bucks front office is the assumption that Giannis is still here. Mm-hmm. You don't go into it thinking, well, he's going to ask for a trade, so how do we start to reshape this team? You go in there saying, we got Giannis, and as long as we got Giannis, that increases our sales pitch. Mm-hmm. Guys like Kevin Porter Jr., Ryan Rollins, Jericho Sims, And obviously Gary Trent Jr., the big one there, that these guys are going to want to play with somebody like Giannis. So that increases your chances of retaining them and then working on other things of how do we best we can start to reshape this roster. You mentioned Giannis at the center. I mean, that's certainly something you're going to have to, you would think, see a lot more of this upcoming season, especially with that ambiguity around the future of Brook Lopez in Milwaukee. But from day one, and to be clear, I don't think the approach has been anything else. The mission and approach for this front office should have been Giannis is here. So we have a little more flexibility, as we've talked about quite a bit. How do we lean into that? And maybe we're not going to go into the season projected to be a top 3 seed in the Eastern Conference and be mentioned as one of those teams on the short list of championship contenders. But we're the Indiana Pacers coming into this season, right? So that's the approach to be taken here.
It is. And I mean, you can look back just through the finals history and see how many 1 seeds and 2 seeds have gotten there over the last 6-7 years where, that's not a requirement, quote unquote, at this point. Like, again, we've talked about how matchups mean so much. It's important to be playing your best basketball at the end of the season, have a little bit of luck in the sense of making sure your team is healthy going forward, all of those things. And again, if Giannis is on this Bucks team and you put together a team around him with some young athletic guys that can shoot and defend, I think that's really the game plan going forward. And you can get a lot of success from that. Now, I'm not saying that's like a championship right there, but I think in year one of, if the Bucks are moving to a more Giannis-centric offense, where the ball is in his hands more often, where he's making the decisions, more of what we saw after Dame was diagnosed with the blood clot and missed the rest of the regular season. If that is the way that this offense is going to be moving forward, it's interesting trying to think of the pieces that fit. Because there are certain types of players we've said for years the Bucks need. You need this type of player to play next to Giannis. And I think an outline of that is still accurate. Of course, you want as many shooters as you do around him. But this idea of moving towards youth and going a bit younger instead of going to that more established veteran role, like what does that look like for this team? And what is the appetite for fans after being so used to watching a team? We're here for championships. And yes, you're still here trying to win as many games, but we've made the comment time and time again of one of the things that why you don't play the younger players is you have to live with the mistakes, the ups and downs that come with them learning the game, understanding their role and growing into it. Whereas with vets, you generally expect them to know and be better. So just this kind of different vibe that'll come with this team too, with Giannis at the center, if they're going younger. I'm actually kind of excited to see what that looks like going forward.
Yes. And, especially if we are to assume most of this group is back, which again, with the assumption Giannis is here, you got a really good chance of that for a number of reasons. Playing alongside Giannis, the fact that we've gone through at a high level the cap situation across the league and for other teams, what the Bucks can do with things like the mid-level exception, the full mid-level exception. You can even open up things like a biannual, and that's going to hard cap you at the first apron, but I think that's where the Bucks are going to be playing. And so it just increases your chances of keeping this group together. And you saw that's where you were your most effective. Those last 8 games in the win streak, those guys specifically in that first round series against the Indiana Pacers, the big thing now is we know this works. We have to supplement it, and we have to add more guys that can fit this piece or fit the style of play, I should say, going forward. So you brought up the youth versus the veteran. There's a lot of opining for certain players out there on the trade market. I want to take a look at that. And also the other name that we mentioned, there was an update on, which I think is the one that Bucks fans are certainly most interested in for good reasons. We'll get into that conversation coming up next here on today's Locked On Bucks. Time to talk to you about our sponsor of today's show, Monarch Money. If you've ever checked your bank account and wondered where all your money went, maybe dining out, online shopping, entertainment, it just gets easy to lose track of everything you're spending money on. That's where Monarch Money comes in as your personal CFO to give you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It is a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When you start using it, you'll be surprised by the insights you learn. things like how much money you're spending on food delivery, and that in turn will help you budget smarter and save more money. Most importantly, instead of juggling multiple apps for your finances, you can use just one, Monarch Money, to check those finances, track your spending, and even plan long-term goals. If you got a partner, it's easy to collaborate with them as well, making things smoother than ever, tracking shared and personal accounts, setting goals, and staying on the same page without the stress that comes with shared finances. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com to score 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA to get half off your first year. The other name, Camille, Pat Connaughton.
Yes.
A couple reports. We mentioned the Ari report. He was one of them, or they were one of them. The Pat Connaughton breaking news, very surprising news, right? Pat Connaughton is expected to exercise his player option that's just over $9 million for the upcoming season. File that under the "this is not news, this is what we all anticipated" category. You know, there's a number of ways to try to go with the, well, what's his role? And, you know, how important is it to have a veteran? Can you start to recoup it? Is he a walking trade exception? You know, is it a guy that's an expiring contract you can package with something else and it's a little more palatable to take into the season, given that it's expiring? Even a wave and stretch. I think Frank talked about that. A few others, Nate Duncan and Danny LaRue, talked about the possibility of that on the Dunked On podcast as well. So you waive Pat Connaughton, stretch it over 3 years, where that cap hit goes from $9 million to $3 million for the next 3 years. There's at least options with it. I think I'm on the fact of, look, we saw him as a breaking case of emergency guy last year, and I still think he was effective in those small doses. I think that's the approach this year. That same thing, injuries are going to occur. Maybe you have one of those moments where, like, let's see what Pat can do here. Maybe this is a Pat Connaughton matchup or game off the bench and in limited minutes. And it does give you that chip too to say, look, if we have something cooking here, this is expiring money. And that's something that, you know, maybe it means you're taking back more long-term money, but it's something that you can do there. I'm of the mind that I wouldn't, unless it hinges on you getting something major done to clear up even more cap room, I wouldn't explore the wave and stretch route. I mean, I where this team is at currently, and we'll get to some veteran names of timelines, that's not your timeline. I don't think. You know, it's grow some of the young guys, take your medicine this year, and then have even more flexibility next year.
Yeah. I think, like you mentioned, the Pat Connaughton report that he's going to opt into his player option, which I think he has until like June 24th or somewhere in that time frame to do so officially.
Did he ask, like, what's the earliest I can?
Right. Like, do we need to wait till the deadline? Because
ready right now.
Like, of course I'm going to take this $9 million. So again, no surprise that he's opting into it. But to your point, I do think that the contract is a bit more tradable with it being expiring, something that can make the money work if it comes to that. I'm not as big of a fan of just waiving and stretching his contract just to do it. Like, if you're going to, like, you know what, we don't really have a role for Pat Connaughton, we don't see a market for Pat Connaughton, don't just eat the year instead of having to take another hit 2 years on one, even if it's at a lesser figure. Dead money on the cap. I don't want to deal with it.
Not here for it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not to the level of Larry Sanders, but I don't want to relive that experience.
Exactly. So, like, don't want to do that. But I mean, for while he's on the Milwaukee Bucks, I think like the role, quote unquote, for Pat Connaughton now is just what we saw last year after it was decided, like, you know what, not a main part of our rotation. We're going to go with the younger guys, which is be a professional, be a good vet. Help your teammates out along the way, teach guys. Like, for example, one thing I would love for Pat Connaughton to do, and I think I heard a little bit about him working with AJ Green last year, which is like inverted pick and rolls, the things that Pat can do really well. Just impart that wisdom on some of the guys who are getting the minutes, getting the rotation, because if you can help coach AJ Green into finding more ways to be a threat with the way that he can shoot the ball, like you want to see that. So yeah, I think Pat Connaughton being on the bench is like a break glass in case of emergency type of vet, or just somebody like, hey, we got some regular season minutes we're trying to eat up here. Maybe not a lot, but get these 5-7 minutes or something like that. Like, just be a good vet. And I think that can be useful. And who knows what can happen with that contract, again, with it being an expiring and what you might be able to get out of that.
Yeah, and I'd love to see the shooting stroke come back too, because there's obviously a regression in the athleticism in Pat Connaughton, which is to be expected for any player that starts to get into their 30s and age in this league. But he had really that one breakout year where that shooting number, remember at one point it was close to 50% that he was knocking down on threes. I don't expect Pat Connaughton to be that guy or to even be a 40% 3-point shooter. But if he can consistently, in his small doses of playing time, be a 36%, 37% 3-point shooter, great. That makes him even more playable for this group. And, I think the other thing worth pointing out is you see a lot of people that like Pat Connaughton's washed and cooked, and he would never, of course, he's picking up the option because nobody else would offer him a contract in the league. It's to a lesser extent the same conversation we have around Brook Lopez. It's not true. I think Pat Connaughton, if he was a free agent, I think he'd get a veteran minimum. Yeah. And if the conversation is Pat Connaughton's on your team, but he's a veteran minimum guy versus $9 million, nobody has a problem with it. I understand that's a $6 million difference, so it's a pretty wide gap. But I still think, to your point, talking about a solid veteran and a guy that can do some things in that break in case of emergency role, that's what you look for in the veteran minimum. And I think we've kind of trained ourselves to think otherwise because that's all the Bucks have had to play with the last couple of years. So you think, what's the impact that we can get from this guy? We need this guy to be a starter for us and have those types of minutes. And look, it worked out with Malik Beasley and Gary Trent Jr. But you can go on down the list and see more names where it doesn't. And it gives you the type of production we're talking about with Pat Connaughton than it does those two names.
That is such a good point. Because I think too that Bucks fans, as we move into next season and what the years ahead have for us, just have to kind of retrain a bit of how we're approaching the team building aspect for this team. Like, to your point, before vet men's were needed, like, we need to try to find quality guys who can play on this vet men because we don't have any other options because the rest of the roster is so top heavy. But if the Bucks are moving forward with this, youth direction, so to speak, like, your playing time is going to come from, AJ Green, from Ryan Rollins, from if you re-sign Gary Trent Jr., from if you re-sign Kevin Porter Jr., it's going to be a lot of younger guys. And then what you're looking forward to at the end of your bench is those vets who can kind of help teach those young guys who are in the rotation, be good vets, be there in case, break glass case of emergency. And then, when Thanasis comes back, him and Pat Connaughton can have the market on, being the energetic vet, helping to coach the guys along and coming in if needed, rarely throughout the regular season. So I think your point about just what you're looking for from guys on the minimum will be a little bit different going forward if this is the direction that the Bucks are going to start moving into for this team, which we've heard Bucks fans for years say we need to get younger. We have to get younger. We want to get faster. And I think that's the direction that they should go this offseason. And with that, what you're expecting from guys who do sign the vet men's is going to be a bit different.
Yeah, and again, as you start to open up more things, then the veteran minimum, what those expectations then are for those role players that you're bringing in to ideally surround Giannis for this group. Speaking of veterans, there's been one name that's popped up quite a bit among Bucks fans, and there's more reporting on him that came out over the weekend. We'll get into that conversation. And one of the things we wanted to talk about, and somebody in the comments already jumped the gun here and talks about the playoff history for the Bucks. We'll get into that conversation next on Locked On Bucks. NBA fans, you know what time it is. Playoff season. It means big performances and even bigger rewards. DoorDash is bringing the heat with a slam dunk deal for Dash Pass members during the 2025 NBA playoffs. It's called They Swoosh, You Score. Anytime a player scores 50 or more points in a playoff game, Dash Pass members score a three-piece crispy tenders combo from Wingstop the very next day. To get it, all you have to do is place an order of $20 or more and use the code WINGSTOP50 at checkout, and you get that combo, crispy, delicious, and totally free. The offer is valid noon to midnight the day after the game. Terms apply. Maybe you have a go-to move after an epic game where you're ordering wings and reliving those highlights. Well, imagine being rewarded with some free food as well just because somebody went off for 50 points in the NBA Finals. And if you've ever looked at your delivery fees and thought, there's got to be a better way than all this money I'm shelling out here, well, there is. With Dash Pass, you get $0 delivery fees and exclusive perks just like this one. Imagine how much more you could save over the course of a season. So here's the play. Sign up for Dash Pass to unlock this and more exclusive deals all season long. When any player scores 50 or more in a playoff game, Dash Pass members can grab a free 3-piece crispy tenders combo from Wingstop the next day with a $20 or more order and the code WINGSTOP50. That's Dash Pass, your door to more savings, more flavor, and more ways to win. So the other name I alluded to, Camille, I've seen quite a bit in the last, honestly, weeks, really, since the Jason Tatum injury occurred. Jrue Holiday. Mm-hmm. There's more reports over the weekend. The Celtics are, I think, actively was the phrasing, but the Celtics are fielding calls on Jrue, and we've talked about it with Frank and others and Van. We know the spot the Celtics are in. Maybe not identically, but we're quite familiar with it in terms of Bucks fans. But the Celtics are going to need to shed a lot of salary now in the second apron, and their expectations have taken a hit going into next season. So the most logical way to shed some of that money, they're about $20 million over the second apron right now. Jrue Holiday is a player that's aging, same age as Damian Lillard. I believe they're separated by a month. And he's making over $30 million a year for the next, 3 years, I think, 2 years in a player option. I would assume Jrue Holiday is not going to be on the Celtics next season. I think that's a pretty safe assumption. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think of the players on that Celtics team that they're looking to possibly move to get some financial cap relief, like Jrue Holiday's at the top of the list. And again, I don't think it's a thing for Jrue is like, we don't think he can play anymore or anything like that. It's just like with this contract and what we have going on with our cap, it is not sustainable at the moment.
I think it's the contract, it's their cap, it's the injury to Jason Tatum. Because if Jason Tatum doesn't get injured, then it's interesting to see, how open are the Celtics to saying, okay, this is it. This is the last year to carry this cap space. We know all we can do is offer veteran minimums, but this is it. And then next summer, we have to shed some of the money. But I do also think it's a recognition of, we don't think Jrue Holiday is like cooked per se, but he's not the player he once was. And, when you start to piece things together and see and assume Jrue Holiday is going to be made available, you've seen a lot of Bucks fans put together deals and say, we'll just bring Jrue Holiday back. Bring him back to Milwaukee. They're trading him. We need some help on the perimeter, especially with no Damian Lillard. Let's do this. We love Jrue Holiday. I wish Jrue Holiday was still a member of this team and Jrue Holiday would have retired as a member of the Bucks. But as we talked about before, the timelines, that's not your timeline to be trading for, vets. We just talked for the last 2+ off seasons and again this off season about 10 minutes ago, the importance of leaning into youth and bringing in young guys. And that's how you shape things where go forward. The goal should be Giannis is the oldest player on this team. He's the old vet, and it's young guys that we're filling in around him. That doesn't fit with Jrue Holiday. And it's not only the age, the money, all of that, but, Jrue Holiday, just as the Bucks did 5 years ago, he's a guy you trade for when he's the missing piece. That is not the case with this Bucks team. I think we've seen enough the last 3 years to know you're not just one piece away from saying we're among the elites in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, there's still a few. They need to build. They need to rebuild what this new look Bucks team looks like going forward, since the previous era of Bucks basketball as we knew it has really come to a close. And honestly, I feel like once Chris Middleton was traded, that was the real official end of this particular era of Bucks basketball. But Yeah, I agree with you. Everything I'm looking at for this offseason, from possible trades to free agents, I should have an age filter on everything that I'm looking at, because it's like I'm just not as interested in those older veteran players at this point, because I am.
So what is it, 29?
Like it's like I'm just that's not what I'm looking for. Even when like the Kevin Durant stuff was coming up, and I saw a few Bucks fans like, oh, they should try and figure out how to get Kevin Durant. And it's like
Same
that's
thing.
no, I'm no longer interested in that type of construction for this team of chasing an older vet that, like, oh, it's a missing piece. Let's get it right now. Like, I think it's really time to start building up for this next era. And I mean, we have to keep in mind too, Damian Lillard is still on this roster. It's just that we don't expect him to play meaningful minutes until
ideally late March, somewhere.
You know what I
around
mean?
there.
Like, so
like
it's
best case scenario. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where it's like you got to keep in mind too that you do have an older player coming back in that sense as well. But for everyone else on this roster, like, I think youth is the way to go. And if Jrue Holiday was on this Bucks roster, I feel like he would then be, I don't want to say miscast a little bit, but put back into a role of, we need you to have a bigger offensive load, which was part of the problem here in Milwaukee as we started to find out, and why his fit in Boston made so much sense of like, hey, you can really focus on that defense and really pick your spots, because you have Tatum, you have Brown, you have Derek White, you have all these other guys. And I just don't know if that role makes as much sense for him in Milwaukee now.
You unlocked one of the bigger questions that we have to address moving forward. I mean, we'll save it for its own show at some point coming up this week, but that is the fact that I think you have to anticipate you're not going to have Damian Lillard all season, and maybe you get him in March, maybe you get him in April, maybe you get him in the playoffs, but a bulk of the season, you're not going to have Damian Lillard. So assuming, as we laid out at the top of the show, Giannis is still here, and that gives you an increased chance of keeping guys like Gary Trent and Kevin Porter Jr. and on. And you bring back most, if not all, of this group and add some things around it. Who's the number 2 option offensively? Like, that's the big question going into this season. But we'll get into that on a later show here in the coming days. The last thing to point to is, we kind of tiptoed around it a couple weeks ago when one of us said, I think the Indiana Pacers are going to win the Eastern Conference.
Well, that was absolutely you.
We saw one of the comments here already, and I remember jokingly talking about this with someone else too. Like, man, what is it about Wisconsin sports where we talked about the track record of the Brewers, where, every team that beats the Brewers until the Mets snapped that streak last year goes on to play in the World Series. And, for the Bucks in the, I don't know, what era do we want to call it? The Giannis era, the Bud era, from 2018 onward, the 2018-19 season, the team that beat the Bucks had at least reached the conference finals. Every team but last year's Indiana Pacers won the Eastern Conference. So you see a lot of people saying, well, I mean, you're losing to the team that wins the conference, which, look, I do get if you're going to lose, at least it's not the embarrassing, you lost to that team and you're losing to the team that wins the conference. But the fact remains, Camille, and this is, I think, where I deviate a little bit from most Bucks fans that have left those comments. So what? I mean, it still means you're not good enough. Like, okay, you're losing to a better team, but fine. It still means you're not where you need to be. So I don't want to get too lost in the, hey, they're not actually as far away as we think, because look at what the Pacers did and look at who they took out and went to the conference finals, or to the NBA finals. I'm not there. No, you still are not where you need to be.
Yeah, my co-host on Technical Foul, Tim, he bangs the drum of like, hey, if we're gonna lose, it better be at least to the champions. I'm like, that does not make me feel. We still lost. I mean, look,
in the sense of, would you rather lose to that team, or, I mean, let's take what Miami did out of it, lose to an 8 seed that just gets bounced and running 4 games the next round. Like, all right, fine, I'll go there, but I don't think it means you can make a case we're the second best team in the East.
Yeah, if anything, to me, it's just one of those more amusing things, because I saw someone put the graphic up, and I think even the Packers have a string of, like, if you beat the Packers in the playoffs too, like, you tend to get pretty far in your playoff run. So I don't know what it is about Wisconsin sports.
Just because there was the 49ers playing them in the playoffs every year.
I mean, that
And the Bucks.
Let's not talk about the 49ers, because if Jair Alexander ends up somewhere like that, I'm going to really have a fit. But that's not this show.
The Vikings, Camille. But
I know, or the Vikings, but that's not this show. But for the Bucks, like there's something to look at that and be like, man, we are getting bounced by champions. So if you take solace in that, I'm not going to try to take that away from you. It just doesn't really bring me personally much comfort, because at the end of the day, it's still a loss. Like that. A loss is a loss is a loss. Like, you did not get to where you thought you were going to. And based on where I thought we would be before the season started, how the season ended, like all of that, like doesn't make me feel much better. But what it does make me do is just put some more respect on the Pacers name. Like, I respect that Pacers team. Like, I can put the Bucks fandom part of it aside of like, man, it's going to feel really good to beat these guys at some point. But like, you have to respect what they're doing. So I tip my cap off to the Pacers and the run that they've had, because they have had one of the most magical, improbable runs this year, with some of just the shot making, the comebacks down the stretch here, where they feel to me like a team of destiny to a certain degree.
Well, I mean, it's like that Miami Heat team that beat the Bucks as the 8th seed, but it does feel like there's at least more here, where that was just a supernova Jimmy Butler performance, and then you had role players shooting the lights out. You look at the Pacers team and you feel like, I mean, I think there's more talent on this roster than there was. I don't think it's even close, that Miami Heat team.
Yeah, and then you're seeing guys who have been playoff risers, where it's like 2 years in a row now. Like Nembhard is somebody who, like, you look at his numbers in the regular season compared to the playoffs, and you're just like, okay, dude gets ready for these 16. Like, it's a different game. So, I think the Pacers, and as we continue through the offseason, especially after like free agency starts kicking in and we start seeing how teams are building themselves up in the East, it's going to be really interesting to kind of just take a look at where every team in the East is heading into next season, about like, how sustainable is this going forward, which I think should be a question with the CBA and all the talk about how big are windows now if you really do have a team, and how long can you keep certain teams together. But for that Pacers team, they have guys on the books, I think for next year for sure, outside of Miles Turner. And I believe the year after that too. So like, this Pacers team as we know it should be here for another year or two for sure.
Yeah, and what's big, not to take too much time on the Pacers, we talked about it on one of the shows with Frank, they have Siakam and Halliburton are on the same deal, and I think the same wavelength as well, but they're at that $45 million opposed to the 50 plus and now getting into 60s like the Bucks and Celtics are facing. So that's huge too in terms of some cap saving there for Indiana. And also, you've seen a lot of people say, well, they hit lucky shots. I mean, look, when it happens on a regular basis, I'm not willing to write it off as luck anymore. I think it's just a tough team that knows how to play in the clutch in those situations. But the Bucks were not good enough to beat the Indiana Pacers. And look, maybe if Gary Trent Jr. hangs onto the ball, if other things go your way and you force a game 6, who knows? You win in Milwaukee, you force a game 7, you can at least thump your chest and say, well, we're the team that at least pushed the Pacers as much as possible. But they don't work out that way. We got a lot coming up on this week on the show, as we got a couple interviews coming here. The first of those will be tomorrow. Camille, you're going to chat with Rafael Barlow, NBA draft expert, to get some intel on, assuming the Bucks don't make any moves here to move up into the lottery, what type of players could they be looking at in the second round? Although I will say, I think it's going to be interesting to keep an eye on the Bucks moving into the late first round, because there's a number of teams that have a lot of picks that you're not going to be able, the Thunder are going to run into this problem too. You're going to have to pay all those guys. You're going to have to start to make some consolidation trades. And I do wonder if teams like the Nets say, we can't make 4 picks in the first. Let's trade one of these for future seconds and cash or something like that. So we'll get some intel on Rafael Barlow and his thoughts on where the Bucks are at in the draft. That'll be tomorrow's show. Another one, we'll keep it a mystery, coming your way on Wednesday, and then Camille and I will be back and start to take a look at who's the number 2 scorer for the Bucks a little bit later in the week. That'll do it for today's show. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.